Nick Major here. Welcome to TopMedTalk. Now, make sure you download TopMedTalk on the 10th of May to hear Professor Monty Mythen reacting to the results of the RELIEF trial, the restrictive versus liberal fluid therapy in Major Abdominal Surgery trial. To give it its full name, the RELIEF trial is hugely important. Regular listeners may recall Professor Paul Miles, Professor and Director of the Department of Anaesthesia and Perioperative Medicine at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne and Monash University, discussing the trial last year. We're going to listen to a clip of that again in a minute. But before we do that, just a quick reminder, make a note in your diary, check your podcatcher on the 10th of May when Monty Mythen will be bringing us the long-awaited results here on TopMedTalk. That's on May the 10th. In the meantime, here's Monty talking with Professor Miles at the Boston ASA conference last year.
TopMedTalk. Monty Mythen here again with Dr. Geoff Lacey and Professor Mike Grocott. Really delighted that we've grabbed a special guest, the legendary Professor Paul Miles, who's grinning at that one, from Melbourne, Australia. Known to us for doing some of the largest, if not the largest, trials in our speciality. So first of all, Paul, the RELIEF trial, why, what is it, what can we hope to learn from it, when will it finish, etc., etc.?
Well, the RELIEF trial is an acronym like all these big trials, comparing a restrictive versus more liberal intravenous fluid therapy approach to patients having all types of major abdominal surgery. So it's an investigator-initiated, pragmatic, international, multi-centre trial. And we set this trial up because there was clearly a lot of uncertainty, disagreement and variation in practice about what people have been doing in recent years with regards to how much IV fluid should be used. And of course, there's sort of promise that perhaps a more restrictive approach could lead to better outcomes. And to me, that was a really important, practical, clinical question. And I believe that our research network could address that in a valid and reliable way.
As far as I understand my reading of the trial design, there are two bandwidths of fluid you're trying to achieve.
So the trial itself, for people who are interested, it has been published about six months ago in the British Medical Journal Open, so the details are there. The way we set out to work out, well, how much is liberal and how much is restrictive? The first thing we did in planning and designing the trial was to get a sense of what people were doing in regular practice here and now. So we actually surveyed colleagues throughout at least Australia and New Zealand. We actually asked them to audit their existing practice. At the same time, we looked in the literature to what people were doing, both in the smaller trials that were being done and the meta-analysis of the trials. And we also asked them in a survey to say, look, how liberal are you prepared to go to think it's still within acceptable bounds of practice? And equally, how restrictive would you be prepared to go? We wanted to therefore get a sense of, is there genuine equipoise and uncertainty? If patients were being randomly assigned to one group that people felt was too liberal or too restrictive, it would actually jeopardise buy-in and engagement with the trial and obviously enrolment rates. And we got a really strong sense that, in fact, there was very consistent signals using all those bits of information to come up with what we believed were safe alternatives, going as, if you like, moderately restrictive, but obviously not too clearly unsafely restrictive. Equally, although we call it liberal, it in fact represents traditional everyday practice in most settings, in most parts of the world right now. So that's how we sort of got our, if you like, the recipe of how much we give at induction of anaesthesia, as maintenance during surgery, and most importantly out to 24 hours after surgery.
And you started the trial a while ago now, understandably, because it's a large trial. How long ago did it start again?
It's pretty well been a 5-year trial. We were really lucky to get funded with our National Research Agency on first application. We started the trial within months of getting that information, and the trial was amazingly delivered on time and on budget. So it's been a fantastic experience for everyone involved. We're now, the important thing about this trial is the primary endpoint is disability-free survival out to a year after surgery. And we believe this is a crucially important patient-centred outcome. It's based on the idea that if people have more serious complications and poor recovery in the days and weeks after surgery, particularly for older people, they literally never fully recover from that. And we were most interested in, well, how does that play out in the months afterwards, in the back home or perhaps in a nursing facility. So, of course, we're measuring as secondary endpoints the typical 30-day complications, the length of stay in hospital, ICU, acute kidney injury, and all those sort of things that we're always worried about. But we want to see if there's actually some sort of coherent pattern between that recovery profile out to 1 year afterwards.
It's a great trial. Really looking forward to seeing the results. And you highlighted this in the systematic review before you started. There's a number of different philosophies in the fluid area. So there's a liberal restrictive story, but then there's this notion of goal-directed fluid therapy. How will you account for that or address that in the study?
Yeah, so I think that's another associated but different question. It comes up a lot, and there's a lot of, again, variation in practice and mixed messages coming from the small trials. Initially, we designed this relief trial as a factorial design, that we were going to address the two questions side by side effectively in a randomised way. But the feedback we got through our trials network that was really adding a bit too much complexity, that in fact many centres here and now are not using a goal-directed device, or if they were asked to do so, perhaps wouldn't be expert in doing it. So we actually pulled back from that and made it a simple single comparison, parallel design. But what we did do is we built into the data collection in the trial whether or not they were using a goal-directed device, what type of device, what thresholds they were going to use for that particular patient for that operation. And of course we collect all that information. So we plan in a sort of an exploratory analysis to see whether or not the use of the goal-directed device itself somehow modifies the effect of the fluid restriction or otherwise, where that effect might differ from place to place, country to country, one device versus another. That'll just be exploratory, perhaps hypothesis generating, but I think it's important information and it helps put the whole trial into context. And that comes right back to the first point I was making, and that is, we're interested in designing practical clinical trials. And this is the sort of thing that the average anaesthetist is dealing with all around the world.
Paul, do you think the results, I'm sure you hope to, but do you think the results will put to bed the question around liberal restrictive fluid therapy?
I certainly hope so. I mean, my big interest is do what I would call definitive trials, that in fact you robustly and completely address the question and collect all the relevant information so that you get a very clear result one way or the other, and that result might be a clearly positive finding, it could be a clearly negative finding, or it might be a mixed finding, but because the trial's so large, we can actually look in to see what types of patients might get the benefit where otherwise it might be irrelevant or unnecessary. Equally, there might be groups that might be harmed, whereas it's entirely safe for others. And you can do these valid subgroup tests in a planned way with a large data set. And you simply can't do this with small trials.
Because how large is it? How many patients have you
We're enrolling
recruited?
3,000 patients.
Wow.
It's designed in a way that allows us to, as I said, in a valid way, explore these things to give us either whether it's a signal or supplementary information that helps, again, the average clinician to decide whether or not that result applies to them or in what types of patients it applies to.
So, Paul, you talked about the importance of the outcome variable in this particular study, so the disability-free survival. Now, I know you're also involved in some of the initiatives around standardising outcome measures, so the STEP compact initiative and harmonisation. Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, so one thing I've learnt over the years, and this will be relevant to any anaesthesiologist, is you read a journal article and they've got some outcome measure and it's got a certain result. And then you go read another article where they studied the same intervention, but their outcomes are measured differently. And all of a sudden, you really can't combine the information in a way that actually gives us a more coherent story. And there's been a lot of articles in recent years in other areas of medicine saying that we need to standardise outcome measures or endpoints in studies so that we can more reliably pull the results to get an overall clear picture, or benchmark one, whether it's a study or a hospital quality system versus another. So I'm working with other interested experts around the world who are doing perioperative clinical trials, that we get effectively an agreement on which endpoints are important to measure in different types of perioperative studies. And when we define the endpoint, we do that in the same way, and ideally measure the endpoint at the same times after surgery. And all of a sudden, it gives us a lot more capacity to get most information out of a single study or a systematic review and meta-analysis.
Great project.
Thanks very much.
So Paul, just I'm not going to press you on the results, because obviously you can't share any of those with us, but you've finished, haven't you, the trial? Yeah,
so we're really pleased. As I said, we the whole trial went exactly according to plan, which even for myself still a great pleasure. So we've finished all enrolment and the 1-year follow-up period. Wow. So we've got all process and outcome data for the trial. We're just chasing up a few loose ends in our data checking process, and we will lock the database basically next week, and I'll be analysing, we'll have the full results within the next month. So I'm obviously excited. No one else will have those results or information for probably about 6 months, but mid-next year they're going to be publicly released around the world.
So why 6 months?
Well, we're really aiming to release results. There's the annual scientific meeting in Australia for both the College of Anaesthetists and the College of Surgeons is being done in Sydney in early May. And we would like to present those results at obviously an interested audience. We're confident that we can get agreement from the major medical journal that we send the paper to, that they will co-publish at exactly the same time. So I think that's the right way to translate the information or implement the information to all interested people around the world. And I think, doing these kind of multi-centred trials with a practical design, with numerous places around the world, that the information coming from them actually applies to everybody, and hopefully we can give them the right information.
So that would, I think, be the largest trial that's completed about fluid management.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, if you look at the most recent meta-analyses that have pulled all the trials together, that this single trial will give us more information than all those single trials. And it's done in a way that's far more robust, far more capacity to get actually reliable results, again, in the main result as well as the subgroup results.
So May next year. Have you got a more exact date for us? People want to put it in their diary?
From memory, it's around about the 10th of May, so early May next year.
Fantastic.
So I promise everybody that will be delivered on time, possibly earlier.
So, well, congratulations to you and to everyone else who's been involved in doing this fantastic trial.
TopMedTalk. And remember, you can join the TopMedTalk team live at one of our many broadcasts. We're scheduled to be in London for EBPOM, 4th till the 6th of July 2018. ebpom.org for details. Go to the website now, ebpom.org.